Good morning, everybody. Hope you're able to hear me as well. All right, so for the topic today, we are looking into tapping into the untapped, or I would say the undertapped, not really untapped to be honest, as to how FMCG companies are navigating rural markets in India, naturally. Now, this literally is the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, right? And the reason why we picked up this topic is because uh, there is a report that says that rural demand, the share of rural demand in the revenue of FMCG companies is for the first time poised to breach the 50% mark in 2025. This is a report that was put forth by CRISIL. Now, there are various factors that is driving this, and the expected CAGR for rural demand is in the range of 14 to 16% over the next 5 years. The factors driving this are rising rural incomes, increasing urbanization, government initiatives to boost rural consumption, such as the PM Kisan scheme, and so on and so forth. While the share of population of India living in rural markets is about 65%, it's the share of revenue that's coming from rural markets in FMCG companies' revenue has never really been more than about 40% or so, not even close to 50% mark. While in the beginning of the pandemic 3 years back, just to take a step back, a lot of reverse migration happened. And because of that, people went back home and they also took their consumption habits back home with them. And because of that, rural demand actually picked up and urban demand came down. And it was at that point in time neck and neck. But since rural demand has historically been very price sensitive, subsequently, in the years just post COVID, in the beginning of last year, 2022, post the war, there was a cascading effect on input prices and inflation was at its peak. And because of that, rural demand just fell flat once again. This year, we've been able to see some green shoots wherein because of easing inflation and rising disposable incomes, and on the back of a pretty good monsoon as well, rural demand is looking, to go up back once again. And yeah, not to mention that the government is also playing a significant role in boosting rural consumption, not just through initiatives, but also by way of developing infrastructure and thereby increasing access and distribution efficacy in rural areas as well. And of course, contributing to this is other factors such as e-commerce penetration improving in rural markets, improving accessibility for FMCG companies to these markets too. Now, to discuss this and as to how and why and where exactly they see rural demand reaching that 50% mark within FMCG companies at least, we have two senior leaders, each with 20 years of experience. We have Mr. Manish Sharma, who's a senior vice president and head of sales at Hygienic Research India Private Limited, based in Mumbai, growing prominent hair care and personal care brands, Streaks, Vasmol, and Florazone. He's a business leader with 20 years of experience in Fortune 500 FMCG companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Colgate-Palmolive, Gillette, Philip Morris, and he did all this post his MBA from IIM Bangalore in 2004. Welcome to the webinar, Mr. Manish. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you, Bala. I'm very excited because this is a topic which has been close to my heart always, because most of the organizations that do well in rural have a direct correlation with how well they are doing overall as well, and we have seen it year after year, right? So a good topic to share a few thoughts that I have and discuss how it looks to me, the way forward that could be there.
Great. Thank you so much to hear your enthusiasm on the call today, Manish. And besides him, we also have Mr. Manoj Ailani from Kellogg's. And in his words, he's a firm believer in the fundamentals of to win in the marketplace, you must first win in the workplace. He also has about 20 years of experience as a sales all-rounder, spanning across companies such as Parle Agro, PepsiCo, and now more recently with Kellogg's in his role as GTM and sales transformation lead. He strongly believes in putting his funda aforestated into action by focusing on excellence in the domain of both business and people. Welcome to the webinar today again, Manoj. Thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So I'm delighted to be part of this webinar, and as Manish rightly put up, these subjects are something which excites us like anything, because these are the daily talks in our company. And for me, with 20 years of experience being on both the side of the table, first on the execution side and then on the planning side, So yeah, there are a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotes to be shared on this particular topic, and rural has been a topic since last 5-10 years that it is a growth driver for many companies. But yet many companies are not able to decode it. And so let us share some of the experience, some best practices, as well as some failures, which in our experience we have gone through and got an opportunity to be part of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much once again. So we'll start off with the questions that we have, to pose of both Manish and Manoj. To start off with, so Manish, I'll start with you. What are the primary challenges that FMCG companies face when entering and establishing a presence in rural Indian markets? And what strategies have been successful in overcoming these challenges? So naturally, broadly, just from a layman's perspective, we see that awareness is one problem, distribution is another problem, and then in between bridging that is, the disposable income problem as well, which is really external. But broadly, these are the three problems. But other than this, is there any other problem which may miss the layman's eye? And what are the strategies you follow to be able to tide over them?
Sure. So see, as you rightly captured, Bala, right? If I really go by the textbook, right? If I go back to Kotler, right, the guru of marketing, right from, and I follow the pattern of awareness to knowledge, to liking, to preference, to trial, and then to repurchase, right? If I really look at it, every channel has their own nuance of how they go about catering to the demand and the challenges of the consumers, right? Now, if I really look at rural, now let me start with awareness and knowledge, right? One of the challenges that we have as an organization is the traditional means of media does not cut through and reach out to the consumers, right? And why is that? Because traditionally there used to be an issue of how many people actually watch television, what was the penetration of television, electricity, etc. Thankfully, with the advent of mediums like digital, right, mass media, and even customized local interventions like wall paintings, etc., this particular piece has been tapped into. Very recently, one of the things that a lot of companies have started doing, a couple of my organizations have also done, is to get into digital wall painting, right? And the fact is, those at prominent locations in key geographies, right? They really help us a lot, right? And the other things like print, wherein the regional print helps us a lot in such situations, because in rural the penetration of the regional newspapers continues to be high, and hence we are looking at customized solutions as far as awareness and knowledge is concerned, right? As I move on to say a liking, right? How do you develop the likability for your brand? Because the challenge is the traditional in-store solutions don't really work. Why is it that I'm saying that? Because there is a lot of clutter that we have inside the stores. As you get to rural, the size of the outlets is small, right? Everything is actually behind the counter. There's no self-service outlets in most occasions. And hence, one of the things that actually helps a lot, significantly more, is something called retailer rural advocacy. Because in an urban town, nobody really has the time to advocate a brand. But the belief that consumers have of a person who's running a top outlet is very, very high. So therefore, as an organization here, things like retailer advocacy become important. How do we inculcate that my brand is superior? The benefits and the features of my brand are communicated and well understood by the retailers themselves, right? And that is how both the liking and the preference for my brand then gets developed. I also then look at, in-store solutions like frontages of the outlets, which are very critical in smaller towns, even more than they are in the bigger towns, because a lot of decision making actually happens right at the outlet, right? As I get towards trial, one of the interesting pieces is that it is, you mentioned about this as well initially, the cost of coverage becomes very challenging for organizations, as they go down the path. Why is it that? Because usually, again, as an anecdote, the cost of covering an outlet, every call that we make from a salesman varies between anywhere between 40 to 50 rupees, right? Now, for that, if I don't really get a conversion of 125 to 150 rupees, I'm actually bleeding from an organization standpoint. And a lot of small outlets do not give me that throughput. And that is where, one, the wholesale channel comes in. How do I ensure that the flow of my products happens smoothly through the wholesale channel, right? Secondly, how do I make sure that there are innovative models that I could look at? Now, there are things like, these days, organizations have started doing telecaller model, wherein, orders are taken by the, over a phone call, and only the supply happens, at the outlet. There are some companies that have also evaluated something like biker models, where there's a biker who takes the ready stock, supplies that to the outlets, because then it becomes easier rather than trying to supply the other day, because then the cost actually goes up. There are also organizations looking at shared costs. So two organizations who are not competing in a category coming together and saying, can we send a salesman together, because suddenly the cost actually comes down to half. There are also organizations, that have come up in the new tech space, right? There are companies like Udan, Reliance, etc., that have come up. They've also tried to say, for a cost of one organization, it might be challenging, but what if we have like 15, 20 big organizations clubbed, right? So all this, is evolving as we talk in the marketplace, right? But, like you rightly mentioned, if I really have to sum it up, right? Things are different in rural as compared to urban, and they're different at each of the stages. And I think, depending on the product portfolio that the organizations have, depending on, what is the bigger objective, that the organization is really trying to go after, each and every step, the nuance of a rural is actually different than the nuance that exists in the urban towns.
No, got it. Thanks so very much for that. And it's really interesting that people think that the only way to reach out to maybe rural consumers is to advertise as much as possible and this and that. But as you rightly said, if visibility is not going to be there and merchandising options are limited, then rural advocacy, where the store owner or the storekeeper becomes your advocate of the product, is extremely important for you to do, right? So this is where I would like to compare and contrast the difference between the kind of products that you sell, which are actually at this point in time personal care products, versus say what Manoj does, which is in the food space, right? And I think Kellogg's, I have worked with Kellogg's in the past as in the capacity of a consultant as well. So a 10 rupee sachet of Kellogg's, right? Sachetization for Kellogg's is something I would never have imagined possible. Yeah, well, I've seen that in shampoos and all those things, but not in personal care segment, but not so much in food. So Manoj, would like to hear your thoughts on this, because while it's FMCG, sure, but then personal care and foods are like chalk and cheese, right? It's significantly different. And for you also need to look at your price to volume ratios and how much you're able to get in your throughput and all those things as well on those terms. So what are your thoughts on this? How do you think, what are your problems in handling and navigating rural markets as against what Manish said? Is it the same? Is it more of the same, or is it largely different, and how do you navigate this?
Yeah, well, so it's largely the same, but there are a few nuances which are different from the non-food companies. And for our viewers, I'd just like to put it very simply. So, for any business, any FMCG business, so the first and foremost thing is, how do we drive distribution, create awareness? So we follow 4A models like any other FMCG company, which is, awareness, availability, and then basically your adaptability, and then your acceptance overall. So when we talk about the availability of the product, it is more or less very similar problem to what Manish said. Your rural market is very scattered. So when we talk about rural, 2/3 of the population stays over there, but there are 6 lakhs villages. The first and foremost question for any other company is, how do we prioritize? Should we go all out? Should we start with a certain set of villages? Should we start with certain states? So, how do we try to decode is, we try to prioritize basis few parameters. One is population, second is infrastructure, third is affluency index, fourth is the economic or the purchasing power parity index of these villages. So just to put in the context, so like in entire India, there are 5 states which contributes to top 20% of the villages. So the number one state is Maharashtra, second is Bihar, third is West Bengal in the east, and UP, and in the south, if we speak Tamil Nadu. So these 5 states all put together contributes to 20% of the top villages. When I take, I just spoke about the parameters, how this top villages are being prioritized. And these top 20% contributes to around 40% of the FMCG sales. So that's how we prioritized, when the market is very, very scattered. And as Manish rightly put up, the cost to serve is very, 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 very important from any business standpoint overall. So this is how, and especially for the company like Kellogg's, which is premium kind of product. But if you talk about the value per box is even lesser than the non-food product, because the food, obviously there has to be a certain pack size which has to be given 5 rupees, 10 rupees price point. In the box, there would be 10 to 16 laddies all put together. So this is another problem. If we talk about the awareness, as again, yes, we do have the challenges where media doesn't cut through, or does not reach to the rural area, and we do leverage wall paintings. We do leverage social awareness by making a team, associating with the panchayat, and once in a week we go over there and create some kind of awareness show to tell people that why including breakfast or breakfast cereal in the breakfast is important to them. That's how we try to create an awareness. Talking about the affordability, so as you rightly mentioned that we have already entered into 5 rupees, 10 rupees sachet. I have my own anecdotes in my previous company. When I was in the rural, I was in one of the town in the Gujarat called Bagasara. This is in the Amreli district, where I saw that even HUL products, like there was a product called Lifebuoy, which was cut into 3 pieces, and that's how consumer used to use in the rural area. So the insights were like, the rural behavior or the consumption pattern is very different from the urban. They would like to buy the product, but they would like to buy the product in the smaller sachet, smaller quantity, and that's where the 5 rupees, 10 rupees price point came into picture. Even lesser than 5 rupees, 2 biscuits sachet from Britannia, 2 rupees pack is something which goes very well. So that's how we also play a game of affordability over there. And lastly, is about the acceptance of the product. So yes, that is completely correlated with the awareness, because you need to really understand the consumer, solve their needs and wants. And sometimes even the product solves the needs and want, but the consumer doesn't understand whether he needs it or not. For example, in breakfast cereals, the first question comes in, why do we want it to, our own breakfast is very healthy. So that's where, when we go and make the awareness of that, how it is convenient. One, it is convenient. B, it is quick. C, can be consumed anywhere when you are traveling or your child is going to school. And that's how we try to, counter all these challenges. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks so much for that, both Manish and Manoj. So I think you've also addressed the question of how exactly your marketing strategy would vary basis the purchasing power of rural Indian consumers as against in urban areas, and how exactly you are tailoring your products and marketing strategies to cater to those differences as well, how you are bridging the gap, because sampling and trial is extremely important, right, for you to be able to drive repurchase after that. So, and for that, you will have to not just focus on rural retailer advocacy, like Manish said, but also try and break down, the product into smaller quantities, which are, easier for trial to happen. Yeah. So, also wanted to understand how exactly, or if at all, FMCG companies are collaborating with local governments, NGOs, and other stakeholders in the rural ecosystem to create sustainable and inclusive business models in rural Indian markets. And are there any real tangible impacts of such initiatives in the past which are sustainable, or is it more of a flash in the pan? So, Manish, again, I would like to hear your thoughts on this first.
Yeah. So I think, what we have realized is, as an organization, it is always good to be able to participate into what the government strategies and objectives are, right? Because anything that the government is trying to drive, if you're able to partner, you get unparalleled support for it. Let's take a couple of examples, right? One of the things is that over the last 5 to 7 years, specifically, the government has been very aggressive with trying to drive sanitary napkins, right? The penetration of sanitary napkins, because it'll be surprising to know that the overall sanitary napkin penetration in India is still only about a 60%, and in rural it's only about 32-33%, right? Now, if you know that the government is trying to really step this forward, right, you can definitely participate in a number of ways, right? First is to understand the avenues that the government in itself are creating, right? So, for example, there are outlets which are created in certain states, right? And this is a few state government initiatives, right? Where there are certain outlets which have been created where they sell only necessary products, but at way cheaper prices. Now the invitations come to companies if they are willing to supply, their key products to these outlets, which obviously will be at a much cheaper price, right? So now things like this, now depending on the objective that the organization have, right, they can participate in this. This is one example. But if I really take a step back, right, there are broadly only three objectives that companies have, right? Very, very broad level. One is to drive penetration. The second is to drive consumption. And the third one is to drive premiumization, right? Right products for right consumers. Now, a lot of times in rural, the biggest opportunity tends to be penetration in most cases, right? While others are also there. If you really ask me saying which in urban, for example, it might be the other two. But in rural, the biggest opportunity that we really try to have is how do we make sure that the consumers first use the product, right? Get into the categories. That is the single largest opportunity in many cases, not necessarily in all where penetration is already very, very high, right? Now, the other thing is, companies also have this avenue of being able to partner with the government on the corporate social responsibility, right? Now, as per the norm in the country, 2% of the total profits have to be spent on CSR. That's a must, right? Now, it is up to, therefore, organizations, how is it that they're able to create, a win-win solution for them as well as the consumers using this platform, right? So, for example, I know, one of my previous organizations, Colgate, they used to partner a lot on getting people to understand the importance of oral health in the country, right? How do you make sure that you use toothpaste and you don't use, that if you're a non-user using Datun, etc., earlier that used to be used, how do you ensure that you brush twice a day, right? Now, these are things that will help the consumers, but it can fall under the broad purview of corporate social responsibility. I know, PNG used to do this program called Shiksha, wherein, every year in April, May, June, and this has been now happening for 15 years, they say every product that a consumer buys of the large packs, they would contribute a part of it to an NGO, which in effect then tends to fund the education of the underprivileged, right? So now these are avenues where you're able to use what you're trying to drive as an organization, right? And tap into what the opportunities are from a government standpoint. Finally, it is also important to right time the consumers. What I mean by that is, there's a very interesting term which I learned at some point of time called the point of market entry, right? What the right time to tap the consumers is when they are ready to get into the category. So in case of diapers, it could be the hospitals right at the time of the birth, right? In case of young girls, it could be the high schools where they are likely to then get into sanitary naps as a category, right? So it's very important to understand where is it that the government priorities are, because then you're able to tap into a much larger potential available, right, which serves the government's objectives on one hand, but also puts forward, your own brands from a very reasonable perspective.
Thank you so much for that, Manish. That was very, very enlightening. And as you rightly said, I think it makes a lot of sense for you to, the last point that you mentioned, makes a lot of sense for you to make an entry at the point where the need is felt the most, right? That is when habits can be formed. Because if you lose that opportunity and then you try and make an entry when, girls get into college for sanitary napkins, for example, then they've already gotten used to not using sanitary napkins, right? So how do you then break that habit and then create this new habit? It's going to be much harder for you to do. I think that was very insightful. Thank you so much for that. So Manoj, would like to hear your views on this as well. So as against what Manish presented, is there something different that's applicable for food as well, or is it more of the same? And what are your thoughts and what are your experiences in this regard in partnering with the larger government NGO ecosystems in driving consumption?
So interestingly, Manish, in our case, it has been other way around, where we have taken an initiative, and government also have realized this recently. So I'm talking about usage of millet. Okay, so Kellogg's has been an 100-year-old company globally. It's been 35 years old company in India, and we have been making products out of millets, a lot of multigrains, and all our products are made of millets and multigrain. And recently, you would have heard that World Health Organization has announced this year as a year of millets overall. And so that's one partnership which has happened, and government has also realized, as India we have abundance production of the millets, which are very, very healthy, which solves a lot of our problem, which are very cheap. It solves nutrition, it solves many other things as far as consumer health is concerned overall. So so that's where we have started focusing more, and in fact the boost from government has really helped us going and making awareness in the urban as well as rural, that why millets are important, why this multigrains are important. Our packs, the labels are, we do mention that what health benefit you get as a consumer. That's one initiative. Second is, I talk about outside Kellogg's in my previous company, where we used to do, there was an initiative from the government of driving woman empowerment in urban as well as rural. So in rural, we have we figure out this as an initiative which we could leverage. And what we did is, we had a similar kind of problem in the rural, where we used to struggle to find distribution partners, especially in the 5,000, 10,000 population town. This I am talking about the PepsiCo now. Okay. So these are the kind of town where you have very small, little, like 5 to 10 outlets over there, but you have a good 5,000-10,000 population living over there. But nobody specifically into FMCG distribution, nobody understand it. So that's where we started driving a project on the woman empowerment, where we went into houses, where we started making women as a coming into the distribution. Some of the women, they started keeping stocks in their home itself, and they used to go and sell it in the markets. And that's how we used to partner, and it was a beautiful partnership. We got a lot of appreciations from the government also, and also from our business objective point of view, we were able to drive a lot of penetration, and we were able to solve the problem of distribution. And slowly we saw that many males also jump into the business, and they started doing the business of distribution in that area. That's a small story how we partner with the government initiatives. Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty clever way of killing two birds in one stone. Two big birds actually. To satisfy the government and also satisfy the company by being able to improve penetration. Manoj, so thank you so much for that. That's actually insightful. Yeah.
In fact,
sorry.
Bala, I can in fact add on a lot of, for example, what we have spoken between Manoj and I are more into sales and marketing,
Yes.
examples. If I really quote one example from supply chain as well, right? See, many a times what happens is that whenever a government is coming up with a new place for manufacturing, right? It happened with Baddi, for example, right? Or in certain places. What happens is the government gives you a X year tax holiday if you set up a factory there. Right now, this happened with Baddi, which is why all the companies then scouted for their factories to Baddi, because they had a 10-year tax holiday. Now, the way it helps us, and it helps the ecosystem, is if the government, what government wants to generate is more livelihood and wages, for workers there at a local level. What it does, it in itself helps the organization to be able to lower down the costs, and therefore being able to, bring it back in a different way for the consumer. So I think, it is actually the entire ecosystem that we should use as organizations, way beyond sales and marketing also, to look at where is it that the government is really tapping into and providing opportunities, because wherever their interests are, the returns could actually be disproportionate for the organizations.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with you on that, Manish. And I think quite a few things have happened in that regard as well from the government support standpoint. So I think the production linked incentive scheme, for example, just three industries, which is your automobile manufacturing, your semiconductor, electronics, etc. These three have alone gotten benefit of about 1 lakh crore rupees of PLI back to them. And because of that, as you rightly said, they've been able to price their products much more competitively, both domestically, and also it makes our exports far more competitive than it could be from, say, China or other Southeast Asian countries. And dozens of industries have benefited because of this scheme. And also, even before that, back in 2017, when GST as a scheme was launched, essentials were always priced at 5%. It was not more than that. And it's extremely important that they are priced at 5%, so that your products don't really price themselves out of the market, right? So I think what you're saying is absolutely right, and the government, I think, has been really prioritizing what is really important, and they've also been sort of helping in growing the ecosystem at large as a whole. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So also wanted to pick your brain on what do you think are the future prospects and potential growth opportunities for FMCG companies in rural Indian markets? What do you see are the evolving trends? Because what I've been hearing largely as to what's been happening so far is still we are looking at initiating trial through smaller, packet sachetization is still, the big daddy of penetration in rural markets. There's rural advocacy, as you mentioned, and using the larger ecosystem, etc. But how is this going to pan out in the future? What are the inputs that will be critical in determining long-term success and sustainability for FMCG companies in rural markets? And the reason why we are still focusing on FMCG is because FMCG is essentials. It's roti, kapda, makan, and FMCG. That should be the fourth category, if you ask me. So, what do you think are the key things to focus on today for long-term sustainability, Manish?
So I think let me touch upon two important facts, right, as I get into this response. I think the first one is rural has always been big and getting bigger. It already contributes to about 44-45% of the country's GDP, if anything, and it has been growing at a faster pace than urban. There is still some way to go. So that is point number one. Therefore, it is of prime importance for every organization, barring the ones that are playing only at the top end of the pyramid, right? The second one is that, so far, one of the reasons that rural has been growing faster has been because, like I mentioned earlier, the play between a penetration, consumption, and premiumization, all of it is coming together much more in rural in an incremental manner versus the urban, right? Especially when I compare penetration, because premiumization and consumption are happening at a pace. In fact, consumption is growing faster in some categories in urban compared to a rural, right? Now, when I look at it, right, there are few things which become very important as organizations. The first one is to really play the right pricing and sizing for the consumer. And because, see, in the past, what I've seen is that a lot of companies are wishful in their thinking on what they want to sell. I'll give you an example. I used to sell a detergent sachet at some stage for a 1 rupee, right? And the company said we'll move this from 1 to 1.5 rupees. We said let's see, and we predicted about a 40% volume decline. In about 3 to 6 months' time, when we were really reviewing it, we realized that the decline was about a 74% and not 40%, right? So imagine the price sensitivity that exists, especially at the bottom end of the pyramid, the 1 rupee, 5 rupee, and 10 rupee segments, right? But even otherwise, having the right value proposition as to what consumers are looking for, having the right sizing, right, and pricing becomes very, very important. It becomes even more important in rural as compared to urban. That is point number one, right? The second big trend that I'm also observing, which we need to note, is till about a few years back, general trade or direct coverage was the only way of reaching the outlets, right? Modern trade had come in, it was impacting the lives tremendously as far as urban and metros was concerned, but what was not happening is the real transformation in rural. However, with the advent of e-commerce, right, that has also changed and changed dramatically, right? Today, a consumer sitting at home, right, can order the best of the product, does not need the availability in a rural store to be there, right? So that is a very, very direct outage that is happening. And one thing, therefore, the way retailers are also responding in rural areas is they've started to really widen their assortment. Earlier, they did not keep that. Earlier, they were very clear of wanting to have only leading SKUs or very high margin brands because they realized that they are the only avenues or channels to reach the consumers. That is no longer the case. So that's the second one, which is very important. The third one is we spoke about media, the regular media not being able to cut through in rural. But what is very important, so one is retailers that we spoke about. The other piece which is becoming very important is that the influencers in rural are even more the elderly versus the friends or colleagues that happen to be in urban. And therefore, when you are reaching out to rural, especially in brands which cater to a population where elders have a role to play, right? It becomes very important as to how do you make sure that they are part of your communication, even if they are not your direct target audience. How is it that what is the role that they can play? Because in rural, that's very, very important as we look at it, right? So if I really play on, I would say that you mentioned about the piece of marketing. All the piece of marketing play out very well, right? And we spoke about a few examples. The last one I will touch upon is, in a urban, the availability is a given in a store because, say if you don't cover, some other companies will cover. But in rural, one of the important factors is if a company has direct coverage versus indirect coverage, right? We see, depending on the category, depending on the brand, the overall sales could be anywhere between a 20% to 100% more, right? If you are covering that directly. Now, obviously, you need to marry that with the fact that you also are talking of a 40 to a 50 rupee cost of covering the outlet also, right? But the fact still remains that the importance of direct store availability is unparalleled when you think of rural. And therefore, as organizations, we are forced to think of returns versus cost on one hand, whether it is about availability, whether it is about the sizing, pricing that we spoke of, whether it is the channels to reach the consumers, and all of it are unique when it comes to rural. And that's why, this makes the rural domain very important, because if it was contributing to 5 to 7% of the business, you could have taken a very different route. But here you have to take the core route of how do you grow it today and tomorrow, because this is half the business now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so very much for that. Very, very insightful again. So as you said, direct coverage used to be the only way to reach out to rural markets, but because of now established networks of e-commerce companies who are covering more and more pin codes of late, and there is also a larger ecosystem of supply chain companies, startups, which have partnered with these e-commerce companies to be able to cover, 70-80% of the pin codes in India. So the top three players who are into e-commerce distribution are able to cover 70-80% of the pin codes in India, and which itself is a significant achievement. And you're saying that is also going to start playing out in the future. So Manoj, I remember last month we had this conversation when we met, and you were saying that distribution in rural through e-commerce is becoming so much less a pain point for you. And I think you have just a handful of people in your team who are able to deliver what 10 times the size of people are able to do for a similar outcome in GT, right? So can you talk about that? So that, and is there any other such initiatives that we need to focus on today for long-term sustainability and growth in rural markets?
As Manish rightly said, so basically e-com has been growing for us in double digits since last 4-5 years, and it has been quite a positive story. And a lot of growth is being coming from the rurals, where we have been trying to drive and penetration and getting into more pin codes in the rural area. It has become such a sustainable and win-win kind of model, because it is very cost effective, because you just need to list your product, and more of the DCs are opening up as far as supply chains are concerned. So they also wanted to increase their reach. And that is also helping us to drive the sales in the general trade, because e-com has what started doing for us is started trying to do a paid trials, which it's very difficult to do a paid trials otherwise in the urban area also. Normally you try to establish a product by doing a free sampling, but with e-com we are able to do a paid sampling where we are just putting and listing the products, and consumer is seeing it and they're trying to picking it up from there. It is also solving it for the awareness, because now with the kind of platform are there in the e-com, the kind of content platform, the opportunity to put a content, rich content is very, very high. So that also help us to create a lot of awareness through e-com. And the third thing, apart from the e-com, what we have realized recent visits to the rural market, as far as like moment the infra is going up, like highways are coming up, there are drastic change in the village. So I'll just tell you a small story of a village, where recently, if you talk about Baroda, where there is a village called Kevadia, where Statue of Unity happens. So like before Statue of Unity, there used to be 5 outlets, and today there are 50 plus outlets. The moment village get closer to the highway, it solves a lot of problems. One is we see that a lot of people who are only dependent on agriculture for their income, they start going and doing jobs because they are closer to the highway. Reaching to a particular or getting a job becomes easier. A lot of hospitals, franchise, a lot of magnet type of outlets are coming over there, and a lot of urbanizations is also happening in the rural area. And that is also helping us to drive growth and consumption. And it is, as you rightly mentioned at the start, that 2/3 of the population is living in the rural area. So opportunity and future is brighter. And as with the kind of evolution of the e-com, with the kind of work government is doing, it is only driving more and more consumption. And as a business man, we are also kind of getting our more focus on the rurals than urban.
All right, great. Thank you so much. That's all I had, but the audience who are watching us live on LinkedIn have got some questions. So I'll just share the first one of them with you, if you could take some questions. The first question is, how would you rank which ones are the relatively easier rural markets by state for your three things, Manish: penetration, consumption, and premiumization, and which are the hardest ones for the same three things and why?
Could you repeat the question so that I understand it very clearly?
No. So, which are the, essentially, which are the easiest and hardest markets within the rural populace of the country? And if they are the hardest, and why is that the reason that they are the hardest? By state, maybe, or you can just talk about certain areas or whatever it is.
Okay. So, let me take a step back. The definition of ease and hardness depends on what is it that you are really chasing, right? So, for example, I'll try and segment this question into two, right? The easier market for me to crack on one hand will be the size based on the size of the business, right? So what happens is, Manoj mentioned about 5 states, right, which are very, very critical. If I look at the top 5 to 7 states, they anyways contribute close to about 80% of the rural business, right? Now, you ask me, the easier thing to do for me will always be whenever I'm designing something, right? I have to keep these 5 or 7 states at the top of my pyramid if I only go by geography, because if I win here, I win big. Point number one, right? Second, it then boils down to, if I really take a step back in terms of my my demand drivers, right? Where is it that my brands currently are? Because see, every company has a starting point. Let me take an example, right? In one of the organizations that I worked, right? For me, South was very, very underpenetrated, right? Because the basic level of awareness, etc., right, were comparatively on the lower side. And therefore, in such a scenario, you would rather want to make sure that you first tap into the lower hanging fruits. Because if your basic level of, again, if I go back to my same model, right, where awareness and knowledge, liking and preference is there, but trial is a barrier, then I go after making sure that there is trial, right? Because that is an easier, so that wherever the opportunity in the funnel is actually lower down the pyramid, right? Or, farther away from the beginning, it becomes easier for me to tap into. The third one is, it also then depends on, is there a larger pie that I'm really chasing, right? Because at times what happens is there is an external play of competition, right? For example, there might be a situation where in one part of the country, I might be the creator of a category, right? For example, in the hair color space today, right? There is a shampoo hair color segment where I'm the market leader and I have a 50% market share in 3/4 of the country. But in the fourth part of the country, my market shares are very, very small, because there I am really underpenetrated. Now, as a company, the question could be, a very logical question is, if everywhere else you are 50, how do you get to a 50? But on the other hand, the response could be, where I'm already at a 50, I have a significant market share. Is it easier for me to go from 50 to 60, or to go from a single digit to a double digit sort of a number? Now, that is, the complexity that we need to look at. So therefore, in isolation, it may not be one variable that I can look at, right? It could be the size of the business. It could be the stage where the brands are. It could be the objectives that I'm chasing. It could be the short term versus the medium term measures. So you need to look at it in entirety, and you perhaps can't really look at it in isolation on one variable, according to me.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's no one right answer to this. It really depends on what your priorities are, and probably it also depends on what your product portfolio mix is, and so on and so forth, right? So I think, I think that's very valid, Manish. And I also feel that there is no one right answer to this question at all. So thanks so much. And I think we probably have time to take one more question, I guess. So Manoj, if you can chip in here. The next question is, I think specifically this is meant for you, I guess, because they are saying you have a mix of breakfast cereal, which is westernized, and you also have over the last few years added a mix of Indianized products, so like poha, upma, and all that as well. And there is a lot of competition in that space. So in rural markets, which of these do you think has potential to take off in the future, and why? If you could answer that.
So I think, see, the question, ideally there are two set of question. One is Western breakfast cereals versus Indian breakfast cereals. I think that question, in fact, it is also relevant for urban market, not only for rural. Forget rural, because rural to any which way we are not able to. I mean, within urban also our penetration, we are still trying to move our pace on driving the breakfast cereals as a category overall. So, answering how do we drive our traditional, or are we thinking of moving into traditional products in the rural? The answer is no. Okay, but yes, we try to get into a traditional breakfast. Why? Because Kellogg's as a company is known for making a healthier breakfast cereals. What are the needs we are trying to solve for the consumer? So it is not that we say that we make tastier breakfast than any household. What we are trying to say is we are there for you as a company if you don't have time as a consumer.
Yeah.
Okay, if you are very busy in your life, and which with the kind of inflation going in there, we have seen the change in the working pattern where both a member in the family has to go for a work to earn. Aspiration are much higher, and that's where we as a company come as an offering saying that okay, you don't need to worry about your morning breakfast, which is which is a ritual, which is must. We give you a ready-made healthy nutritious breakfast which you can trust, which is easy to make, easy to consume, and in fact it is fortified, so it also take care more than what you are consuming in your traditional breakfast. So it doesn't depend on the geography. The strategy is same for rural and urban overall, and that's where we try to get into certain traditional breakfast as well.
Got it. So you're saying it's more to do with positioning, right? It's convenient and more nutritious, right? Take it if that's what you value over, maybe having the tastiest food that's out there, because a lot of people eat fried snacks for breakfast too, and I've somehow not been able to get my head around that, but they do that too. But if that's what you want, by all means, please go for it. But if convenience and nutritious food is what you want, which may not be the tastiest, it's fine, right? Great. And as you rightly said, it's not just a problem for rural markets, but it's a problem for, urban plus rural as a whole. All right, great. You know what? I think this has got to be probably the only webinar where I've taken 3 pages of notes. That's, incredible. And it just goes to say that in 45 minutes, if this could happen, then it's just a product of the combined 40 years of experience that you both have, focused experience in FMCG, sales and distribution specifically. So thank you so very much for joining us today on this call, both Manish and Manoj. Truly value your time and insights, and I'm pretty sure that all the audience who are watching us on LinkedIn and YouTube have a lot to take away from this. And we wish you all the very best in your future careers as well. Thanks so much once again.
Thank you, Bala.
Thank
It was really nice having you. And we spoke about topics perhaps very close to our heart. Hopefully the viewers and the audience also took away something which will be useful for them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bala. Thanks for this opportunity, and always look forward to share the experiences which we have faces in our life. So thank you to the audience, and thanks to you guys. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, including the audience as well. Take care. Have a great day and a great weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.